Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us on this Lead Next, which is a division of Lead Today webinar. Today, we want just to do a little bit of mentoring, if you will, a little bit of encouragement regarding leadership in general. We've entitled this Becoming the Leaders We Need to Be. Now, if you're listening to this webinar, you're probably a reader of leadership, somebody who observes leadership, somebody who practices leadership, or at least you have aspirations to give your life in service to others in some way, whether it be in the for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector. So with that, sometimes it is so easy to get lost in the forest, lost in the weeds, as we hear these kinds of statements. So today we want to just kind of look at some of the things that are important to leadership. They're priorities to leadership. They're a combination, a mixture of things and principles that are good for you and good for whatever it is that you're trying to do. So with that, we're going to jump right in. The first principle that we want to talk about is that leaders do what needs to be done. They do what needs to be done. It sounds obvious. It sounds simple, perhaps. It sounds, non-romantic. It doesn't sound maybe super aspiring. But folks, when you really think about it, that good leaders do what needs to be done. What we're talking about is opposed to doing what we feel like doing even what we're good at doing. Now, our feelings and our emotions and our strength has a lot to do with maybe how well we'll do in leadership today, this week, this month, this year. But somehow that has to become subservient to what needs to be done. We all are good at this or that. But if you want to be in leadership, we're always asking the question, what are the greatest priorities? What is the most important thing right now? What really needs to be done right now? It's a question that leaders have to ask themselves, at least from a strategic point, every quarter, every month, every week, maybe even every day. What needs to be done? It's rarely going to be something easy to do. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't need to be done, right? So one of the things that keep people from succeeding, if I could use that word, from achieving, from seeing profits, seeing mission accomplished, is usually because we're putting aside, putting off, not dealing with some of the things that we need to deal with. Now, let me get to the point. So you see on this PowerPoint, there's a bullseye, and we often think that what needs to be done is out there, outside of me. Very often what needs to be done is something that needs to change and be transformed inside of me. It is a glaring weakness that is stifling my organization. It is stifling my growth. Now, we also believe that strengths and someone's strengths needs to be the emphasis of their time and what they contribute. But it is very possible, and I see it on a regular basis, that sometimes our weaknesses are so glaring they just cannot be ignored. And sometimes you can't simply delegate it or hand it off to a team member to do. Why? Well, because they're usually issues like communication, issues like accountability, confrontation, interpersonal skills, the kind of things that are oil to an engine, using an abstract, term. Things that have to be there for a leader to be able to get through and lead a team in a proper way. Doing what needs to be done. So it would not be bad for you in this particular presentation to start making some of these points an assignment. So maybe you can write this down right now. Am I doing what really needs to be done, inside of me and outside of me? And what is it? Do I even know what the greatest priority is right now, this month, this quarter, in what needs to be done? So if we want to be the kind of leaders we need to be, we need to live by that principle. What needs to be done? Now, we use a term here called live Christianly. Now, not everybody who listens to this webinar might might not be, you might not be a believer. You might not be a Christian. And there might be a lot of reasons for that. Maybe you haven't been presented with what Christianity really is, what the faith in Christ is, or maybe you have been around people that represent Christianity and it hasn't exactly attracted you, to that faith. Or, maybe there's another reason. But when I say live Christianly, I'm not talking about religion. And I think culturally, it's not a difficult concept to understand. When you think of how a good Christian would behave, how a good Christian would think, how a good Christian would work through things, as we know, everything that we do, there is friction. There is friction in our organizations. There is frictions in our relationships. There is friction with our vendors. There's friction everywhere. As that old saying goes, anything that moves causes friction. And so, sometimes that can really create a callousness in us. It can create a black and white way of going about things. In fact, maybe some people would think that living Christianly is black and white. Well, I would, I would really have to push back against that idea. You remember those bracelets that came out that a lot of times we kind of make fun of now today, but it came out, many years ago. WWJD, what would Jesus do? It's still not a bad question to ask. It's a tough question to ask because, we don't always know what he might do in this situation or in that situation. But, are the values or the boundaries of the way that I lead my life, are they Christianly? So, forgiveness is at the center of Christianity. Grace is at the center of Christianity. Equipping, helping people grow, it would be at the center. Honoring and respect, this would be at the center. Really important. Now, I know that you have met all kinds of people who claim to be Christian, and then you see behavior that makes you think otherwise. Isn't that interesting? So, I don't think this is a small term. I don't think it should be taken lightly. It's something that we need to ask. When people think of me, do they think of a good man? Do they think of me as a good woman? Do they think of me as a moral leader? Do I have moral authority? In other words, whether someone agrees with me or not, can they trust in the moral center of my decision making? Okay? And so obviously that is a lifelong, both these first two principles are lifelong things to think about when I'm thinking about becoming the leader that I need to be. So let's go to the next. If you want to become this leader that makes a difference, you need mentors. Now, mentors are different than coaches. They're different than consultants. At least in my view, most often a consultant is hired for a particular strength, a particular knowledge that they can bring to the table to help a person, a leader, or an organization move forward. A coach is somebody who is very, very good and very astute at seeing things within an organization and within a leader and helping that leader, that organization to also see them and to assist them in becoming and doing the things that they need to do. So a coach doesn't do the work. The coach helps navigate the person or the team towards their desired uh, goals. Now, mentors, in my opinion, are better described as people that are on the same path that you are on. And they have the knowledge, they have accomplished something similar to what you desire. So, in other words, you know that they're up the trail a few miles. You know that they have probably gone through what you have gone through. And if you notice the slide, we have three different colors of paint representing the fact that you will need probably multiple mentors in your life because you know you're not necessarily going to be an expert at everything. So you have a green color, you have a blue color, you have a red color, just as an illustrative purpose. One might be somebody who can mentor you financially. Another might be spiritually. Another might be how to be a supervisor, how to be a leader. I mean, you can think about the multiple things here: parenting, marriage. Um, maybe an entrepreneur, someone has built their own business, started and built their own business. These are mentors. Now, you might say to me, "No, wait a second, Jim. Where do I find these mentors? Do I go walking up and down, the civic center and say, 'Hey, I need a mentor. Hey, I need a mentor.'" And or maybe you feel insecure because no great sage has stepped out of line and pulled you aside and looked you in the eye and says, "Ma'am, I think that you have amazing abilities for the future and I want to mentor you." Now that can happen, but rarely does that happen. Why? Well, mentors are busy doing what they do. They're leading, they have a lot of their own relationships. So to acquire mentors, first of all, you've got to be keenly aware of what's around you, who's around you. And when you go to this and that, a workshop, a presentation, a seminar, or you're working beside someone who is brilliant at this or that, it requires you to be a little proactive. And there is nothing wrong with taking someone out for coffee, asking someone for coffee, for maybe even a lunch, and letting them know that you have come to appreciate where they are, and you kind of wonder how they got there. And as the conversation goes on, you might even be able to say, um, would you be willing to mentor me for this period of time, for this reason? And this is all I would ask of you. You'd have to lay out the boundaries, um, and you would have to follow through on what it is that you are asking for. Now, that can't always happen, but today in our world, we have so many vehicles, distribution channels for communication. Take, for example, this webinar. There are so many authors, audiobooks, webinars, workshops. You don't, a mentor, it'd be great if you knew the mentor, but you don't always have to know the mentor to have that person as a mentor. So if you're not reading enough, you can be mentored by somebody just through what they've written and practice and learn those kinds of things. Now, I'm going to tell you this right now. If there's one thing that I would do over again in my journey on leadership, instead of say, "Woe is me, I wish I would have had more mentors." If I had something to do all over again, I would say, "Doggone it, I'm going to acquire mentors." Here's what's funny. even though some might say I'm drawing to the end of my career, that is not at all the way I'm thinking. And I'm going after mentors today, and some of them are a lot younger than I am. The world just continues to change, and there are so many topics that I know very little about. And so I chase down folks, and sometimes even if I don't establish a mentoring relationship, I seize the moment of an appointment to learn whatever I can from that person. If you've been involved in any of our training, you'll know that one of the things that we teach is that a healthy person is somebody who's constantly learning. So even if you can't put faces and names with this idea, at least think about it in a learning perspective. This next principle is probably the one that I see most abused by not practicing. I often hear someone ask this question. So tell me about your style of leadership. If someone asks you that question, you'll probably answer it. And what's scary about that is you're basically telling me that you have one style of leadership. But leadership is not about style. This kind of relates back to the first principle of doing what needs to be done. Leadership, the style of leadership, the way one applies leadership has everything to do with the context of leadership. What do I mean by the context of leadership? Well, what's the leadership situation? Is this an organization that is growing and healthy? Is this an organization that is toxic? Is this an organization that needs to be turned around? Is this a startup? What is the history? What's the culture of this organization? What are the greatest priorities? What's the greatest strengths and weaknesses of that organization? All of the things that I have just machine gunned out helps me understand how I would apply leadership. Because, though you can make an argument that leadership is a person, I think there's a stronger argument that says leadership is really applying a skill set. It is applying what is needed to a context. I got this, picture on this PowerPoint with this girls' softball team. The reason why I have that on there is because I've had the joy and opportunity of coaching both boys teams and girls teams, and you can send me hate mail if you want, but I have learned that they're two different contexts. Now there's a lot of similarities. Athletes are athletes. Many of them want to learn, but I learn and grow and become better athletes. But I've learned in general, at least in my experience, that coaching girls there are some advantages in coaching girls than coaching boys. I've noticed that in general there seems to be a willingness to cooperate. There is a discipline to the mechanics. There is a great sense of team. And maybe boys are a little bit more the wild, wild west, where each of them are trying to prove their manhood or something. And so, from helping boys, grow from trying to be an all-star, superstar to being a teammate, I find to be not always part of that boys' culture when I take over a team. I just wanted to give that as an example. I think coaching boys is a lot of fun, but that is one difference I noticed when I had the opportunity to coach a girls' softball team for fun. Every leadership context then requires different style or application of leadership. So instead of bringing in your style, whatever you want to make that to be, when I read the top of resumes today, I see people kind of saying, this is how I go about what I do. And if that were true 100% of the time, a lot of those resumes go in my trash can. I hope that makes the point there. Okay, so let's go to the next. So, Innovation is something that we hear about all the time. We hear it talked about all the time. It's exciting when we come up with new ideas, new technology. I mean, we are in a world of technology, and now we have technology to protect technology. We and on the negative, we have nuclear threats around the world, and now we're building defenses against those threats. We have the internet. We each have these personal computers, and we have our email accounts and our websites and our bank accounts and all of these things. And there's just so much going on in the world. And we most businesses have their own apps now, and I mean, it's just amazing the warp speed that's going on. I remember when I was younger, I used to try to tell jokes about, you have phones with cords on them, to a wall, and people would look at me and try to remember those days. And I mean, that is so old of an analogy of how fast things are changing. This says beware of the cutting edge. A lot of us are creative people, and so we like creative things, and so we kind of run to those things. But wisdom has taught me that we need innovation. We want the cutting edge to continue to be out there. But the question that I have to ask myself as a leader is my leadership about being on the cutting edge? Because if I'm chasing every new thing that comes around, what am I really doing? Am I paying attention to the core of what I should be doing? It's funny. You have investors who invent. You remember the whole .com era? That was the cutting edge, and that crashed and burned. And now it's been making a comeback. Well, why? Someone has to sit back and say why. Sometimes when you rush to these cutting edge ideas, you get burned in that. And I think you get burned in it because it's not mission critical. Mission critical, if you've never heard that term, I would write it down. You need to be about what's mission critical in your organization and your leadership. And you need to be aware of the cutting edge. Now, if the cutting edge turns out to be something that is useful, it'll become a staple. You're not going to get left behind. Now if you're an investor, that's a different topic. You have to analyze your risk. But when you're talking about leadership, what are your core duties? What is your business about? Yes, of course you're going to keep your ear to the ground so that you don't get beat by the competitor who has, the newest thing. But let's face it, a lot of us have seen competitors. I mean, gosh, with what I do, folks, I cannot tell you the thousands, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, and the millions of dollars that is spent on R&D, research and development, is spent on innovation, and is spent on creativity. But I got to tell you, a lot of those millions, I would not say was creative for innovation's sake. I would say it was creative for creative sake. In other words, nervous energy. Always feeling like you got to do something that's new and flashy. Man, have I seen lots and lots of waste and lots of disappointment by chasing. If you are a reader of scripture, Proverbs warns us about trying to get rich quick. This isn't the exact same thing, but they're cousins, aren't they? So beware of the cutting edge. Yes, you should keep your ear to the ground and what's happening that could make you more productive. But you should be slow in changing those channels. All right. And then finally, this is really important. All of us in our leadership journey go through difficult times. I heard that a lot from a lot of people. Um, and I, the first 20 years, more than 20 years of my leadership journey, I mean, I experienced bumps in the road, an occasional tire in the ditch, but, never really experienced anything tragic, anything that I would consider to be heinous or disgusting or, oh my gosh. And then one day it happened. For me anyway, out of the blue. Did I fall asleep at the wheel? Maybe. What happened? And I almost every leader that I have talked to in a significant way that I've come to know and trust, got a level head, somebody who's down to earth, doesn't have an ego, the size of California, somebody that I could simply have a conversation with. I've yet to meet a leader who hasn't got conked over the head, who hasn't been, beaten up and thrown to the side. And you know what? I'll tell you one thing that it's not about my story, but man, you land on your feet, you come back out of that, you learn so much about that. You learn about people, you learn about blind spots, uh, you, you become wiser in what you do, and more humble. You become more humble. But what you end up doing is you end up realizing that that's part of God's plan of disciplining us. And I really like that word, disciplining us, making us better thinkers. And then, again, taking us back to point one, do what needs to be done. Sometimes we put things aside and they come back and haunt us. Making sure that we don't compromise, our values, just really critical that we do that. But the thing is that if you have a worldview that believes in a creator and that creator knows your name, then it is not difficult for you to recognize that you have somebody watching out over you and has good in mind for you. But pay attention to your life and believe that um, that your life has purpose and it has meaning, and learn through this process. So let me just wrap up by walking through these again. Becoming the leaders we need to be, we need to do what needs to be done. We need to live Christianly, have mentors in our lives. Always realize that good leadership studies the context. What does this organization need most? Beware of all those flashy neon lights around you. Stay focused on what it is that you're supposed to be doing. And then finally, realize that though life is short, it also has lots of grace if you continue to grow. Well, thanks for spending this time with me. This is Jim Piper with Lead Today, and more specifically, Lead Next. I hope you enjoy it. Would love to hear back from you with any feedback or questions that you might have. Have a blessed day.